with us tonight, but thanks for joining us. This is Grief 101, the new normal. And my name is Scott, and I will be presenting with Tony this evening. So I'm the bereavement coordinator for VNA Hospice, and I've been a chaplain for a little over 10 years now, almost 11, and I've been a minister for 20, going on 21 years, and just glad to be a part of this. And it's our hope and desire to be of a comfort to you and educate and normalize the grief experience for you. I've had my own personal losses as well. My dad, Bob, died 5 years ago this May from esophageal cancer. And so that's my closest loss as of recent. And Tony, go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Yeah, I came to the grief process when my husband and I lost our son, Michael. He was 27 years old, and this June will be 12 years that he's deceased. He had epilepsy and apparently had a seizure while he was unattended, and we found him in his bedroom on the floor. So that's my grief experience. The one thing that helped me manage the grief and get through it was the grief support group that VNA offers. And after attending that for 3 years, I took the training to become a facilitator myself, because I really felt that I had a debt of gratitude to pay back and help others.
That's right. Well, thanks, Tony. It's going to be a good evening. Just to tell you a little bit about VNA. VNA is a nonprofit hospice and home health provider, and we've been around for over 65 years in our community here locally in the Inland Empire of the Los Angeles area. And we provide primarily hospice services. We do have a palliative care program, which basically means a person who is terminally ill, but they might have more than 6 months of life to live. They can receive palliative care services through us, and we do offer a private duty caregiving service as well as a part of our company. And we have 3 different offices, one in the Ontario area, one in the Apple Valley, Victorville area, and one down in Marietta, Temecula area that service all of this whole Inland Empire region. So just glad you're here with us tonight. The objective of our time tonight is to present steps to follow in order to rebuild your life. We want to focus on a variety of resources and self-reflection in order to determine the right course for you to take to move forward. We entitle it the new normal because after a loss, we have to learn to live life again without the one that we lost. And we find that new normal and how our new normal looks for each individual person. Tonight, we're going to share from a variety of different thinkers in this area of grief support. We have different theories, different authors that we're going to be going through. There are a variety of different ways to express very similar ideas, and we're hoping that just presenting some different types of voices will allow you to kind of find one that works for you, that just makes sense to you in order to move forward in life. You know, the first few months of grief are the early stages of grief, the early phases of grief. But as we learn to live without the one that we loved and we lost, we begin to want to move forward. We begin the need to move forward in life, not to get over it, because you never get over it, but you can learn to live with it and move forward with life. So that is really the direction we're going in our time together tonight, is to make sure that we're actually taking steps to move forward with life. So with that, Tony, take it.
Yeah, so what do you do now as you work towards the new normal? Next slide. In the pain of grief, it can be difficult to think of that anything will ever be normal again. And it often requires us adjusting to a new role. Before we lost our loved one, we probably introduced ourselves by our role or title. I'm a teacher, I'm a parent, I'm a spouse. And if that person is gone, that changes the role that you have. And so you need to find a new way to describe yourself. In order to carve out a new pathway, you will need to evaluate how you want to see yourself going forward. You need to start connecting again to everyday life. Our normal requirements off our new normal requires us to develop new routines which help us function in daily life. Also, at this time, you're going to find that some of your support has faded. Usually you have a group of people that show up and help you through the first few days or months, through the funeral and making arrangements and so forth. But you may find yourself on your own now, where those people have left to go back to their lives, and you need to find a way to connect again to your life. You may have noted this can be pretty scary. So go slowly and change just one thing at a time. It doesn't mean that you're going to be 100% free of grief, but it's no longer in your forefront. As you develop these new routines and goals, you're going to feel empowered to move forward and build upon each success. And amidst all of this, don't be surprised if you're experiencing STUGs. We've talked about this before, the sudden temporary upsurges of grief. They become less frequent, but they will occur as long as you love and miss your loved one. So you still have permission to grieve even as you move forward. In giving yourself permission to grieve your loss, you honor the relationship you had with the loved one. They are not forgotten. Remember that you are not alone and you're not crazy. You are just still mourning. You need to acknowledge that your feelings of sorrow and over the loss are valid. It's okay to still feel bad, even as you're working to move forward.
Grief. You and I both have reactions to grief, and then we also have responses. So there's an initial reaction to grief when we have a loss, and then our response is basically our way of coping with the loss. So Linda Matchin is a social worker and grief counselor in the United Kingdom and England. And I read her book a few years ago, and it's the book references in the back of this presentation. And by the way, we do have a download available to you. So on your screen, you should be able to find the download section and download our whole presentation for that we're presenting tonight. And you can see the reference material at the end of this presentation as well. But her book is really good, and I actually had some email exchanges with Linda, and she gave me permission to share a lot that I have learned from her book as well. And so I just want you to know that these things come out of that book, and it is really good stuff. And I want you to see what I'm talking about. So she has an understanding that we have two different reactions. We either have an overwhelmed reaction to our grief and our loss, or we have a controlled reaction. So the overwhelmed reaction can look like this. It can be feelings of anger, guilt, sadness, particularly in the early stages of loss, okay? So this is somebody who has an emotion-dominated state, somebody who has feelings, and they wear their feelings on their sleeve, so to speak, and they just are overwhelmed by those emotions. And so when we are in a reactionary response to grief, or we're reacting to our loss, we can be overwhelmed with sadness, with guilt, with anger, any type of emotion that could be coming over us, and we are simply overwhelmed by them. Now, some of us react this way. We react by being controlled with our emotions. And again, sometimes people just have the natural or learned disposition to suppress feelings. Some cultures, some backgrounds, some households that you've grown up in, that you and I grow up in, are controlled with our emotions. And so it's not as if you're not feeling the grief, you're just trying to stay controlled in that grief. So how does Linda Matchin gives us our responses to those two reactions? We can respond with vulnerability, or we can respond with resilience. I've mentioned resiliency in times before, but I want to express a little bit about vulnerability. A person who is vulnerable is seen as having the inability to manage and reconcile feelings, thoughts, and actions in a satisfactory way, and an inability to oscillate between core grief states. And I'm going to show you that chart in just a moment. But somebody who is vulnerable is somebody who just cannot seem to manage or reconcile that overwhelmed feeling. Now, they could be controlling their feelings, but they can still be vulnerable in that attempt to control those feelings. So you either respond with vulnerability or you respond with resilience. Resilience is the ability to face the distress, tension, and uncertainties of loss with courage, resourcefulness, and optimism, while recognizing those areas of life where control and active choice are still possible and appropriate. So when we have a loss, we can respond to that loss with facing that loss and having hope and courage and resourcefulness and optimism. It's an attitude. It's a way we respond to difficult things that happen in life. And this is something that I think we are really in need of in our culture today. Both the young and the old need to learn resilience. And if there's anything that has really caused us to face this pandemic that we've been experiencing has done that. We need to build resilience, not just physical, but emotional, mental, and spiritual resiliency in life. And that is really where we're going to focus the rest of our time together today. But before we move on, I want to show you this chart. It might be a little difficult to see, but you will see on one axis the vulnerable, resilient responses, and then you have the overwhelmed and controlled reactions. And so you can be vulnerable and overwhelmed, where the emotional distress, grief dominates and hinders your day-to-day functioning. Okay, so that the grief and the vulnerable emotional state that you're in controls and hinders everything that you try to do in every day. Okay, you could also be resilient and overwhelmed, where you have powerful feelings of grief and you accept them and you face them, face the consequences of the loss, but it doesn't hinder you in your day-to-day functioning. So you can still be vulnerable, or you can still be overwhelmed and be resilient at the same time. Now, on the other side of it, if you're more of a controlled emotional person, you control those emotions, you can be vulnerable in that control, where the impact of the loss impedes thinking and behavior and defeats the aspiration for control in your day-to-day functioning. So if you tend to be a more controlled person, you stop wanting to be, and you just are at a loss, and you're more vulnerable in that state of control. You also can be resilient in your controlled response to grief. Where the impact of the loss and its consequences are realistically accommodated for and do not impede on day-to-day functioning. So you can still face it. You can face and be resilient even if you're overwhelmed or you're controlled. So that's kind of where we want you to be. We want you to focus in life in moving forward into the new normal, finding a way to be resilient even if you have a controlled response or an overwhelmed response to grief. You can still build resiliency. That is the good news. Tony.
A lot of times when we talk about what exactly is the new normal, people are looking for some definition. And so what I like to do is use the analogy of a move from Los Angeles to New York. If you had to leave this home and move to New York City, whether it's for family or for business, you would find yourself arriving in New York slightly confused, needing to find your way between the market and apartments and living and the subway and new friendships, new ties, new job responsibilities, possibly. But after 6 months to a year, you will find that you have just naturally developed a routine, a daily routine that gets you from one place to another, and you're fairly comfortable with that. But no matter how hard you try, New York is never going to be Los Angeles. You'll have a normal life, but it will be a new life. And that's kind of what the new normal is like, is taking all the elements of everyday life and creating them into a new routine. Therese Rondeau describes 6 R's in processing grief. Next. These are the 6 R's. We're going to be focusing mostly on the last one, reinvesting in yourself, but let's just read through them quickly together. First, you need to recognize the loss, admit that it happened, and don't try to avoid recognizing it. React to the separation, express your emotions and your feelings, and share those honest reactions. Recollect the deceased and your relationship you had with them. Keep them alive through your memories. Relinquish old attachments. Some people don't like the word relinquish, but what it is an acknowledgement that your world has changed and it's not going to go back to the way it was. Readjusting is developing the new routines that we were talking about and your new roles. And then as you reinvest in yourself, you're going to find the goal of your new normal and reinvest in yourself. So reinvest in yourself to allow the grief process to build resilience. Scott was just talking about that, and change you to become a fully functioning person again. You might think of it too as a rock that breaks off and falls into a river, and the rock may have originally been jagged, but as the water passes over it and smooths the sides, the rock becomes smooth. And that's kind of like our grief is sharp and painful in the beginning, but as time washes over it, it becomes smooth. And that will help you become a fully functioning person. And here's the description that Joseph Stephen has of that. The fully functioning person is someone who is accepting of themselves, values all aspects of themselves, their strengths and their weaknesses, is able to live fully in the present, experiences life as a process, finds purpose and meaning in life, desires authenticity in themselves and others and societal organizations, values deep trust in relationship, is compassionate towards others and able to receive compassion from others, and is acceptant that change is necessary and inevitable. Transformative grief is another way of looking at your grief journey. As you notice, the butterfly starting as a caterpillar and going through the different stages and becoming a butterfly. And the transformation means a significant alteration in the form of something, just as the slide before showed the changes. This, you can see that transformation means a significant alteration of form, moving from an old known form to a new unknown form. Transformational grief moves us from our loss through the mourning with to create the ability to experience life and times of fulfillment and meaning. Look for the positive things as you go through your daily life, and you might want to start a gratitude journal. If you start looking for positives and make notes of them in your gratitude journal, it will give you something to check your progress. When you feel bogged down and you're not making any progress, you can go back and look at your gratitude journal to see what exactly you have been able to accomplish. To move forward, it is good to consider what is lost, what is left, what is possible, and what is needed. The first one, what is lost? In addition to the person that you lost, you have probably lost a relationship, a close friend, a spouse, financial stability, and incidentally, probably a gardener, a cook, a caretaker, or an accountant. What is left are the positive things that you can focus on. Your friends, your family, your support. Compare what is lost with what is left, and that will help you determine what is possible moving forward. What is needed? The sanctuary and safety. You usually find these with your religious counselor or group of friends, a place that you can go and feel safe and feel yourself. Validation is needed that your feelings are real. It's okay if you're sad. It's okay if you're mad. It's all part of mourning. Remember that mourning is normal, natural, and necessary. And you need witnesses, probably close friends or family members that remind you of your progress and remind you what they see happening and the changes you've made. And that will validate your journey. A connection to one's higher power, whatever you choose to, that to be. A choice to create meaning and connection when it's absent. It is important that you make a conscious choice to create meaning. If you don't work for this, chances are it may not happen. And remember to continue with your rituals. These are how we remember our loved one and keep them included in our daily life. Choosing to forgive, let go, and say goodbye. This is a tough one. Many times when we lose our loved one, there are words left unsaid, arguments not resolved, all the wish you coulda, woulda, shoulda. A way to overcome this is to write a letter to your loved one. Somehow the act of getting your thoughts organized and down on paper gives you a release of those emotions and may help you to move forward. Look for opportunities for comfort and healing. You know, get that soft blanket, get the massage, eat good food, take care of yourself. You need to put yourself as number one here so that you can have the energy to go forward with your journey. You also need challenges that may come up in daily life that help to move you forward. One thing this is a book you can't see real well, but it's by Alan Wolfelt, Wolfelt. It's called Healing Your Grieving Heart. And it is a book of exercises, just one page to do, takes maybe 10 or 20 minutes a day, but they're manageable and they help you move along on your journey. So challenge yourself to try something new every day. One thing that is really tough, a tough challenge for most people, is to re-enter their social world, to mix and mingle with other people. But I have found sometimes that's easier than I would have thought. When I joined the support group, the bereavement support group, I found that it was easier meeting strangers and talking about my story because I could choose what I wanted to tell them and I could choose what I wanted to leave out. Whereas your friends have good intentions, often they smother you in, how are you? Come on, let's do this, let's do that. And so sometimes joining a new group is actually easier than being with old friends. A lot of times celebrations are difficult because you want to celebrate birthdays and important events and so forth, but you may feel guilty about feeling good or even laughing at a joke while you're in the midst of mourning. But think about what your loved one would want for you. Your loved one would want to see you happy and want to help you celebrate. So in their memory, go ahead and celebrate. Here is another person's interpretation of meaning, meaning finding meaning in life. It's the factor that sustains us during times of difficulty, stress, or challenge. It helps us see past the issues and focus on the reasons we're working in the first place. It's where the heart really kicks in. If you're searching for meaning in your life, oftentimes the answer is service. If you get busy and get out of your mind for a while to help other people, it will help move you along as you get a sense of accomplishment. Harold Kushner is a rabbi that wrote the book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. His quote is appropriate here. Sometimes there is no reason. What is important is to focus not on why the tragedy happened, but where it will lead you. Meaning can be found within ourselves. Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
So in finding meaning, there's one expert in our world today who has written more than anybody else in the field of psychology and grief counseling. He's written hundreds of journal articles and a few books on this concept of finding meaning. It's Robert Niemeyer, and I love how he describes meaning and moving forward in grief. When he says, when grief moves forward, the survivor gradually integrates the event story of the death into his or her life narrative, while drawing attachment security from the backstory of a loving relationship with the deceased. So a lot of his work is actually devoted to helping people integrate the death and loss of their loved one into their own life narrative story, and then filling it backstory, filling up your story with the backstory of everything that's led up until that moment of death. And he helps people rewrite their life story, which in doing so helps people find meaning. So he says a loss is integrated if when the person acknowledges the reality of the death. Okay, we say this in a lot of different ways. You have to accept it on a regular basis. You retain access to the bittersweet emotions of that event itself, the death itself. It's bittersweet, right? I mean, when we in hospice world, when we have people die, what we term as a good death, it is truly a bitter sweet experience when it's a good death. And sometimes people are robbed of that good death experience, and it's more bitter than sweet. But really, to access that bittersweet emotion, and then to revise the mental representation of that deceased. So you need to spend time thinking about that person's life and what they did to bring more meaning into your life. And that's a part of rebuilding your story and integrating it into your life. He also says that when a person is integrating that death story into their life, they formulate a coherent narrative of the loss. You know, sometimes when a death occurs, it is such an emotional thing. It is such a distressful thing. It's traumatic. You're tired because you're been up a lot and all that. And it's really hard sometimes to find a way to remember a coherent narrative of actually what happened. I remember going through this with my mother when my dad died. It was really difficult for her, but I remember I asked her to consider, and I had my brother who lives in the same town as they do. They live out of state. I asked them a few months after my dad died, I asked them to sit down and write about the last week of my dad's life. Write it out. Write out what happened, literally, just like day by day, play by play, as much as they can, because I wanted them to integrate that into our story of my dad's death. And I'm really glad that they were able to do that, because now we have it written down and we can remember what happened. Okay, so we can formulate it into my story. I can add it to the story of my life, and being able to express it to my friends and to my family, my children even, how I experienced walking those final days with my dad. And when you integrate that into your life narrative, it redefines your life goals. Oftentimes, as Tony mentioned earlier, sometimes people tend to gravitate towards a new cause or something to give their time and volunteer for, because the loss itself redefined their life goals. Meaning, if you have lost a loved one from cancer, a lot of times people get involved in fundraising and taking part in cancer research, development, and fundraising and all that for cancer. So people do that as a way to redefine their life goals based upon what happened in the loss, in the narrative. Some of you have probably heard of Viktor Frankl, if not all of you. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called In Man's Search for Meaning. And he was actually a prisoner during the Holocaust, a Jewish gentleman who was at the Auschwitz camp. And he wrote a lot about what he learned about suffering during the concentration camps in that time frame during the Holocaust. And he said this: when a man finds that it is his destiny to suffer, he will have to accept that suffering is his task, the single unique task. He will have to acknowledge the fact that even in the suffering, he is unique and alone in the universe. No one can relieve him of the suffering or suffer in his place. His unique opportunity lies in the way in which he bears his burden. He also says when a man finds that it is his destiny to suffer. Oh, I think I got it there. Never mind. I was going to repeat it. What I want you to know is that he came up with components that make up meaning in life. And I want you to know and understand that he wrote this stuff in light of all the suffering that he personally experienced and the suffering that he saw other people experience. And he came out of that saying, you know what, there's a way you can start living life again with meaning and purpose. So a meaning-filled life, according to Viktor Frankl, starts with creativity, striving to produce something, setting a personal goal, or finding a way, finding a cause to follow, is what we've mentioned already. So when you are trying to build your new normal and find a way to move forward with life, you need to start with creative thinking for yourself, to find some new goal, find some new cause, find something that will get you up out of bed every day, that'll kind of light a fire in your belly, so to speak, to have a little bit of something to say, you know what, this is what gives me meaning and purpose. He says also you need to find a way to have experience, focusing on truth and beauty, but most of all, found through the experience of love. So to experience a meaning-filled life is to focus on love, truth, and beauty, things that bring joy. When I ask people in my work as a chaplain and in my work in grief, I ask people, what is it that brings them joy in life? Sometimes when you're in grief, that is a very difficult thing to answer. But there are some things that you can find that literally brings a smile to your face when you think about it. Attitude. Another component to finding that meaning-filled life is to have a capacity to turn tragedy into triumph, transforming a human predicament into an achievement. This is an attitude thing. Much of what we experience in life we cannot control because it's done to us. But one thing that we can control is how we respond to it with our attitude. So the attitude to build resiliency in life is to be able to take this tragedy and turn it into something good. Some people have a hard time doing that. They're pessimistic by nature. They don't have a positive thing to say. And then when a loss hits them, obviously that is just the way they're going to respond. But to build meaning in your life, in my life, we need to build that attitude of resiliency. The attitude of gratitude is another one to think about. I love that. So building a meaningful life through turning this tragedy into something good. So to keep moving forward, you do so one step at a time. One step at a time. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie, oh, come on, it just left me, but there's a movie with Bill Murray, and he talks about he goes to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist tells him just to take one baby step at a time, just one baby step to the door, one baby step to the elevator. So What About Bob? That's the name of the movie. Really funny, but it's actually a very good technique. In counseling, it's just one thing at a time, one step forward at a time. And that is what we are encouraging all of us to do tonight, is to start moving forward with your life. Even though the loss is so tragic and we are still grieving that, and we will continue to grieve that through the rest of our life, we can begin to move forward. So, some questions for us. And again, if you download the presentation, these will all be there for you. But if you want to jot some of this down right now, go for it. I would like for you to consider, in the process of moving forward, to ask these questions. What is a goal? Use that creativity that Viktor Frankl talked about. What is it that you want to now try to accomplish? Something to move your life forward. I've known people that they said, you know what, I don't want to sit around all day long doing nothing. So I'm going to go back to school and learn something new in school. And so they took computer photography classes and learned how to do digital photography and all that kind of stuff. So that is a goal, something to do to move forward, to have an outcome way of thinking, saying, I'm not going to get stuck, I'm going to start moving forward. Some people say, you know what, I'm going to start traveling again, or I'm going to volunteer, whatever it might be. But to really, truly move forward, write it down. Take the time to be creative and think about it and brainstorm and ask yourself, what can I do next? And the next question is, what is the current reality? So when looking at how to move forward, there are definitely roadblocks in moving forward in life, no matter what it happens to be, no matter what the goal is. So what is your current reality? Get clarity as to what's going on right now. What are the things that you're dealing with right now? So what is that current reality? It could be, I've just been doing nothing. I've been sitting on my couch, not doing anything. And And I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not satisfied with my life that way. So ask yourself that question, write it down. What is the current reality? Get that clarity. What are your options? This is the brainstorming thing. What are your options? You know, you might have some barriers, but what are the ways that you can move around those barriers? You know, to move forward. What are those options? You know, you set your goal, and then you see what your current reality is, what you're up against. Then start brainstorming what might be the direction you can go, the ways you can accomplish that goal. These are wonderful questions to ask yourself in life and also through the grief process. And then what will you do and when? One of the things that I've learned about human nature is that human nature, we might go through questions 1, 2, and 3 here and have it written down, and then I share it with 0 people. I don't share it with anybody. I keep it to myself. And what that does is it allows me to not actually do it. And that is the reason why I put in a kind of it could be a little harsh word for you, but the word is accountability. To share what your goal is, what your options are, and how you're wanting to move forward, share it with somebody outside of yourself that can say, you know what, I want to share with you how I feel like I'm going to make steps to move forward with life, but I know I can't do it on my own. I need somebody to ask me from time to time, how are you doing with that goal? This is the #1 thing that causes people to stay stuck in life, when they choose to keep it to themselves and not share it with somebody else that will help them move forward. I don't have personal experience with this, but I know people who have gone to like a Jenny Craig or a Weight Watchers for the goal to lose weight. The reason why those programs actually work is because you have somebody there holding you accountable. If you're like me, I try to say, I'll just watch what I eat. And guess what? I don't lose the weight because I don't have to be accountable to anybody. That's one of those things in life that, as an example of what this looks like. We have to have somebody outside of ourselves to hold us accountable to making those steps to move forward. And lastly, this is the last slide we're going to share, and then we're going to try to do a little bit of question and answer. We'll see what we can do with that. You know you're getting better. When you start to move forward, you know you're getting better. Helen Fitzgerald says it this way: you are in touch with the finality of death. It's a constant reminder. You understand that death is real and it's final. You can review both pleasant and unpleasant memories. You've built your new narrative. You've integrated the death story into your life story, and you can reflect upon that, both the good and the ugly, the good and the bad, the pleasant and the unpleasant things about how you experienced the death event in your life. You can now take and enjoy time alone. When being alone, it doesn't feel like you're a loner anymore. It actually is a re-energizing thing. You can enjoy a good joke. You know you're getting better when your sense of humor comes back. And you can also enjoy a good book. So that's really our encouragement for you today, is to know that you will get better. Many of you have gotten better. It's a wonderful idea to start writing your journey out in some form or fashion. If you don't like to do a lot of narrative writing and journal writing, that's okay. Bullet point, put a list together, and start documenting your journey, because at some point you will get better and you'll be able to reflect and say, you know what, I can tell I have gotten better in my grief process, and I'm finding healing, and I'm able to move forward.
Well, there's one thing I wanted to share about getting back into the social situation. I heard this at a seminar, and it struck me as very useful. When somebody invites you to go to a party or a social event and you're not sure if you're able to handle it, you tell the host or hostess, sure, I'll come, but I have other plans for that day, so I'll try to stop by, and I'll see you. But then you go, And if after 15, 20 minutes, it's overwhelming and you just can't stay, you can always say, oh, I'm sorry, remember I had another appointment today, I'm going to have to leave. But if you're having a good time and somebody says, well, I thought you had to leave, you can say, oh, that got canceled. I'm having a good time and I'd like to stay.
Mm.
And some people have a hard time. They say, oh, I don't know if I could lie about this. But if you say you have something else to do or something else planned, your plan could be to go home, go to bed, and cry. But they don't need to know that. You're not lying,
Mm.
but you are giving yourself an out. So
Absolutely.
I found that helpful.
Thanks, Tony. So I appreciate you all being here tonight. And Tony, thank you for your help in co-teaching this with me. And again, blessings on all of you, and may you all take steps forward in your grief process to live life with meaning and purpose and joy. It is possible. Take care. Thank you so much.
Take
Take
care.
care. Bye-bye.